All right, let's dive in. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're going to tackle global economics,
Ooh, global economics.
which I know might sound a little dry, but I promise, stick with us. It's anything BUT. We're going to uncover some really wild stories about how countries rise and fall, financially speaking, and how all of it connects back to you.
Yeah, it's interesting how economics can feel so abstract, right? Like up in
Yeah.
the clouds. But then when you start looking at it through the lens of individual countries and their stories, it's like, whoa, it's a whole different ballgame.
Totally, totally. And to guide us through this financial jungle, we have Xiao Lin's book, She.
She.
Have you heard of her?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Shaolin, her background is incredible. She's got degrees from like Peking, Columbia University, worked on Wall Street, and now she's this like super popular financial educator online, across platforms.
Wow.
So she's not just an academic like stuck in the ivory tower. She knows how to make this stuff relatable, for everyday people.
Okay, so we've got an expert guide who's been in the trenches, loves to share.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Now, what kind of, wild stories are we talking about here? Give me a teaser.
Well, get this. We're talking about a country, and we'll get to it, with a 260% debt to GDP ratio, and it's still functioning. It's wild.
It's 160%. That's more than double what?
Yeah, it's insane. Also, the rise and fall of these massive, corporate networks and how, global agreements like the Plaza Accord had this crazy domino effect on economies worldwide.
Okay, whoa, 260% debt to GDP.
Yeah.
That sounds like a recipe for, complete disaster.
You would think, right.
Yeah.
But that's the thing with economics, it's full of surprises.
Okay, so I'm intrigued. So what's our mission for this deep dive? Are we going to come out as, economics gurus by the end of this?
I mean, that'd be great. But really, the goal is to give you a solid understanding of how these major players on the global stage work. So from Japan's wild economic ride to South Korea's kind of unique hurdles, all the way to how things play out in, the oil-rich Middle East.
Wow. Okay, yeah. That sounds ambitious, but I'm game.
Okay.
Let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So where does she begin?
So she kicks things off with a story that honestly sounds like a movie plot. So we're talking about Japan's economic rise and fall.
Okay.
So imagine this. Japan, post-World War II, utterly devastated, right? I mean, drowning in debt, a shadow of its former self, as an economic power.
Yeah, that's a pretty bleak picture to start with.
Yeah.
Bleak. But I know they bounced back in a big way. Japan became this huge economic powerhouse. How did they pull off that kind of turnaround? That's insane.
Right. It's crazy. So Shaolin, she points to this system called keiretsu, which is, it's kind of hard to explain, but imagine these interwoven groups of companies, often centered around a major bank.
Okay.
And they all work together. They share resources, investments. It's almost like this massive, coordinated team. You know what I mean?
So instead of this cutthroat competition, they're working together?
Yeah. Collaboration over competition.
Oh, okay.
And that was huge in their rise.
Interesting. So that's a pretty unique approach. It worked incredibly well. It made Japan an economic powerhouse.
Yeah, I mean, it was really effective for a while, but like any good story, there's a twist, right?
Oh no, here comes the twist.
Here comes the twist, and this very system that fueled their rise also played a role in their pretty dramatic fall.
Ooh. Okay, I'm hooked. What happened?
Okay, so enter the Plaza Accord. It's the mid-1980s. The U.S. is dealing with this huge trade deficit, right? In part due to the influx of Japanese goods. So they put pressure on Japan, along with other countries, to adjust their currencies. Basically, they wanted to weaken the U.S. dollar to make American goods more competitive,
So Japan had to make their currency stronger, meaning that their products became more expensive internationally.
Exactly. So it hurt their exports.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So to counter this economic slowdown, Japan did what, a lot of countries do. They lower interest rates to encourage borrowing and spending, to try to stimulate things.
Yeah, that sounds, on the surface, logical.
Right.
You said this backfired. How?
Yeah, so lowering interest rates, it was kind of like pouring gasoline on a fire. Remember that keiretsu system? With easy access to cheap credit, these massive corporate networks, they went on a spending spree. I mean, they were speculating like crazy in real estate and the stock market. And it wasn't just individuals making risky bets. It was entire interconnected corporations. So they were inflating this massive bubble.
So instead of cautious investment.
Yeah.
It just became a free-for-all.
Yeah, it was like a feeding frenzy, And when the bubble, because, all bubbles burst eventually, it burst in the early 1990s. It sent shockwaves through the entire Japanese economy.
So from economic miracle to sudden crash, what were the consequences? Like, did Japan ever recover?
Well, that's where it gets even more interesting, right? So they entered what's called the lost decades. Think declining GDP, deflation, rising unemployment.
Wow.
It was like this economic hangover that lasted for decades.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't just about numbers. It had this deep impact on everyday people and families, right? People losing jobs, their homes, their savings. It was rough.
Yeah, this wasn't just some abstract financial crisis. This is like real human tragedy.
Absolutely. And then there's this issue of what they call zombie companies.
Zombie companies.
Yeah. So these were essentially businesses kept afloat by banks despite being totally unprofitable.
Okay.
Often because of those keiretsu ties we talked about, right? So you have these companies that should gone bankrupt, but they're kept alive artificially.
So they're like dead weight, dragging down the economy. They're not letting healthy competition kind of...
Exactly. They're sucking the life out of the economy like zombies. And Japan's response.
Yeah, what did they do?
Even more extreme measures. So we're talking zero interest rates, quantitative easing, and, get this, negative interest rates.
Wait, negative interest rates.
Negative, but
That means you're paying the bank to hold your money.
you got it.
That seems so counterintuitive.
It does, right. But it was this desperate attempt to stimulate lending and spending. And to some extent, it kind of worked. The Japanese yen weakened, their exports became a bit more competitive, but it wasn't this magic bullet solution.
So it seems like they were throwing everything they could at the wall and just hoping something would stick.
Kinda, yeah.
Did Lin offer any insight into why these measures weren't enough? Like, what were the underlying issues?
Yeah, she points to two key factors. So first, Japan's aging population, right? Declining birth rate, fewer consumers, less overall demand.
Right.
And then second, their deep-seated cultural aversion to price increases. So you have this deflationary mindset. It's almost impossible to escape that deflationary spiral.
So it's like, wow, societal and cultural influences play such a huge role.
Oh, absolutely.
Economic policy, fascinating.
Yeah.
So, I mean, after 30 years, has Japan managed to break free from this slump? Especially, considering all the recent events like global energy crisis, crazy inflation.
Yeah, that's a question that Lin leaves us pondering.
Okay, so we got to keep reading.
Yeah, exactly. But before we jump to conclusions, let's shift gears to another Asian powerhouse with its own, fascinating story. South Korea.
Ooh, okay, bring on South Korea. What makes their story, stand out from Japan's?
Well, it's interesting because they achieved a similar economic miracle to Japan, but took a slightly different path, right? So they transformed from a poverty-stricken nation after the Korean War to this global tech and manufacturing hub. It's often called the Miracle on the Han River.
Right. The Miracle on the Han River.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that they also had their own version of those powerful corporate networks.
Yes.
The chaebol, right?
A chaebol, exactly. These family-controlled conglomerates, right? And they were instrumental in South Korea's super rapid development, but they also faced a lot of criticism for concentrating too much economic power.
It's always like a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Right, exactly.
Fast growth on one hand, potential downsides on the other.
It's like a trade-off, Are there any other surprising aspects of the Korean economy that stood out to you?
Definitely. So the John's housing system, it's pretty wild. So instead of paying monthly rent, tenants give landlords this large lump sum deposit up front. Whoa, that's like a completely different approach.
I know, right? It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And it has a huge impact on their economy. And we can't forget the impact of the 1997 Asian financial crisis.
Oh, right, yeah.
Which hit South Korea hard and kind of forced them to reevaluate their whole economic model.
It seems like these economic crises can be like a catalyst for change.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes you need that shock to the system to they kind of wake up and reassess.
Yeah. Did South Korea face similar, social consequences to Japan as a result of, their rapid development?
They did, yeah. Lin highlights issues like a pretty rigid social hierarchy and, just like Japan, a declining birth rate, which leads to those similar demographic challenges.
Yeah, it makes you realize that, Like breakneck economic growth often comes with these like societal
Yeah,
trade-offs.
there's always a cost, right?
Yeah. So is South Korea destined to follow in Japan's footsteps, or can they like carve their own path?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And we're only scratching the surface here.
Right.
Lin covers so much more ground in her book, from India's emergence as the outsourcing king to the debt crisis that rocked Greece.
And don't forget the EU's internal struggles, the aftermath of Brexit, and like the whole unpredictable landscape of the Middle East.
Oh, yeah. And how could we leave out Russia's transition from a planned economy to, like, the era of oligarchs?
Right.
Or Turkey's, like, totally unconventional economic policies under President Erdogan. It's mind-boggling how it all fits together.
It really is. It's like mind-boggling but exciting.
Yeah.
Like we're getting a glimpse into the forces that like shape our world.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. All right, so let's continue this economic adventure. What other like fascinating stories does Lin have in store for us?
Oh, you are not ready for this.
Oh boy, I'm excited.
Buckle up. It really is like piecing together this giant economic puzzle, And Lin, she gives us all these like intriguing pieces to examine.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm ready to dive into these other stories. So where should we go next on this like world economic tour?
Well, Lin paints this really fascinating picture of India.
Okay.
She calls it the outsourcing king, which is like, highlighting its vast potential, but also acknowledging those deep-rooted challenges that they face.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
India has this massive young English-speaking workforce, which has made it, a global powerhouse for IT and services, but I also know they've struggled to develop like a really strong manufacturing sector.
Exactly. And Lin attributes that in part to issues like, corruption and the lingering effects of the caste system. It's a good reminder that economic progress isn't just about numbers, right?
Right.
It's about navigating these really complex social and political realities.
Totally. Yeah. It's easy to forget that sometimes when we just look at the pure economics of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we've got India, a country with tons of potential, but also facing some serious roadblocks.
Mm.
What other countries kind of caught your eye?
Greece definitely stands out.
Greece.
Their story, it's kind of like a cautionary tale about the complexities of joining a massive economic union like the Eurozone.
Oh, yeah. The Greek debt crisis, that was like all over the news a few years back. Bailouts, austerity measures. It just felt like a constant economic roller coaster.
Oh, it was. It was a turbulent time.
Yeah.
Lin breaks down how Greece's heavy reliance on tourism and their struggles to compete within the Eurozone's like rigid economic framework kind of contributed to their woes.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if a one-size-fits-all approach to economic policy can ever truly work for such diverse nations.
Right, like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, something's got to give.
Exactly.
And this leads perfectly into another one of Lin's deep dives, the European Union as a whole.
Right. Lin frames the EU as this unique experiment in economic and political integration, but one that's constantly grappling with these internal conflicts and competing priorities.
I imagine it's like herding cats. Like, I mean, you might have these moments of harmony, but ultimately everyone's going to go their own way.
Exactly. And speaking of going their own way, we can't forget about the UK.
Oh, yes. Brace it.
And the aftermath of Brexit. Lin unpacks the political drama leading up to the vote, the endless negotiations, and the economic consequences, which are, still unfolding.
It's like a messy divorce with like no clear winners, and both sides are just, figuring out how to split the assets and move on.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation for sure. Now let's shift gears to a region with a long and complex economic history, the Middle East.
Okay.
So Lin traces their story from the discovery of oil to the rise and fall of OPEC, highlighting those power struggles that have shaped the region's economic and political landscape.
It's like this high-stakes game of chess with oil as the most valuable piece on the board.
Exactly. And then there's Russia. Their story is one of like dramatic transformation from the Soviet Union's planned economy to the like Wild West capitalism of the 1990s. And Lin introduces us to the oligarchs, these incredibly wealthy individuals who amassed like huge fortunes during that period, often through, close times to the government.
It sounds like a modern-day feudal system, with these powerful oligarchs
Right.
holding immense sway over the economy.
Yeah, it's this fascinating dynamic and one that continues to shape Russia's, economic landscape today. Of course, we can't forget about the current energy crisis, which was triggered by the conflict in Ukraine, which, reminds us how interconnected the global economy truly is.
Yes.
And how these geopolitical events can send shockwaves through the entire system.
Yeah, it's like this domino effect. One event
Exactly.
can trigger a chain reaction with, like, totally unforeseen consequences.
Absolutely. Speaking of unpredictable, our final stop on this whirlwind tour is Turkey.
Turkey, okay.
A nation known for its strategic location and more recently for President Erdogan's, how do I put this, unorthodox economic policies.
He's unorthodox. Okay. I'm intrigued.
So Erdogan has this unconventional belief that lowering interest rates, contrary to like traditional economic thinking, is the key to combating inflation.
So while other countries are raising rates to cool down their economies,
Yeah.
Turkey's doing the opposite. That's a bold strategy.
It is. It's a bold gamble, to say the least, and it's had some pretty dramatic consequences for the Turkish lira, leading to, soaring inflation. It just highlights the fact that there's no single playbook for economic success.
Right. Every country has its own unique set of circumstances, its own challenges, its own opportunities. And what's so great about Xiao Lin's book is that, like, she brings all these different stories together, showing how interconnected the global economy truly is.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the numbers. It's about understanding the choices, the strategies, the human stories behind those numbers.
You've hit the nail on the head, and that's what makes understanding economics so crucial, right? It's about recognizing the forces that shape our world, the choices that nations make, the consequences of those choices, and ultimately, like, how it all impacts our own lives.
Yeah. We started this deep dive talking about how economics can feel like so abstract, but now it feels so much more real, so much more human.
Absolutely.
It's not just about theories and data.
Right.
It's about people and their decisions.
Yeah.
And like you said, the ripple effect
The ripple effects, exactly.
of those decisions
It all comes back to us.
in some way.
Absolutely. And that brings us to like a thought-provoking question for you, the listener. If you could advise a nation's leader on their economic policy, what would be your top 3 priorities?
Ooh, that's a good one. It really makes you think about the trade-offs, the long-term consequences, the ripple effects of every single decision. Yeah, tough question.
It is. It's all about seeing the bigger picture, connecting the dots, and understanding that economics is this intricate tapestry woven from countless threads.
And as Xiao Lin reminds us, it's a tapestry filled with fascinating stories, unexpected twists, and the constant potential for change.
Always changing. Yeah.
Always changing.
So keep learning, keep questioning, keep exploring.
And never underestimate the power of a good shishi to illuminate the world around you.
The power of knowledge.
Until next time, happy diving. Yeah, it really is like we've been on this incredible journey around the world, not geographically, but economically.
It's true.
And it's amazing how interconnected it all is, how these seemingly separate stories all kind of weave together.
Right. And that's the beauty of Shaolin's approach. She takes us beyond the abstract theories and dry statistics and reveals the human drama behind all these economic trends, which I think makes it so much more engaging.
For sure. Speaking of human drama, I'm still thinking about that question you posed earlier.
Oh, yeah.
About, if we could advise a world leader on their economic policy, what would be your top 3 priorities? Like, if you were in that position, what would you focus on?
Oh, man, that's a tough one. But I think for me, it all boils down to balance,
Okay.
So first, you got to focus on sustainable growth. And I don't mean just chasing those short-term gains, but like really creating an economic environment that benefits everyone in the long run,
Right.
Thinking about the future.
Yeah, sustainable growth. That makes sense. What else?
Okay, so second, I would prioritize investing in human capital.
Human capital. Okay.
Yeah, so that means like education, healthcare, job training. You got to equip people with the skills they need to thrive in this rapidly changing economy, right?
So not just focusing on the numbers, but like on the people behind the numbers.
Exactly. People first. And then finally, I'd emphasize resilience.
Resilience.
Yeah, because like the world is full of unexpected events, right?
Yeah.
Pandemics, geopolitical shocks, you name it. So we need economic systems that can adapt and bounce back from these challenges, Like they got to be able to roll with the punches.
It sounds like those 3 priorities, like they go hand in hand.
They do.
Sustainable growth, investing in people, building resilience.
They're all interconnected.
All interconnected.
The global economy?
Stuff like the global economy itself, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been an eye-opening deep dive, to say the least. We've explored the rise and fall of these economic giants. We've uncovered, like, hidden economic systems.
It's true.
And we've even, like, grappled with some of the biggest challenges facing the world today. So
yeah.
It's been quite a ride.
It has. And hopefully, we've inspired you, the listener, to keep exploring these topics on your own. Because, like, understanding economics, it's not just about numbers.
Right.
It's about understanding the world around us and how we fit into it all.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive, I have one final question for you.
Oh.
What's, like, the one key takeaway, the one, like, aha moment you hope our listeners will take away from this episode?
That's a good question. I'd say the biggest takeaway is that economics is this living, breathing entity,
It is. It's constantly changing.
It's constantly evolving. It's shaped by countless factors, and it impacts every single aspect of our lives, whether we realize it or not. So stay curious, keep learning, and never stop questioning the forces that shape our world.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And to echo Xiao Lin's message,
yeah.
Keep diving deep, keep seeking knowledge, and keep sharing what you learn.
Spread the knowledge.
Spread the knowledge. Until next time.